Hello and welcome to the first week of the PHP course. In this course, we're going to slowly but steadily aim towards some kind of web development. In this week, we have variables and conditions. Conditions are the backbone of PHP. You're going to encounter them everywhere. There's just not a single line of code you will not use conditions for. But now, just to explain how it works. So first of all, slightly off variables and conditions, we need to create a PHP file. So at the end of the week, I will be asking of you to create a PHP file with specific conditions. I will specify them in the special task under the Google Classroom, and I will precisely name what I want to put there. So each file, PHP file, has to contain the less than sign and a question mark. That begins the PHP code in this piece of thing afterwards until the end, or if you specify the ending by using the question mark and the sign for greater as, the field between these is considered for PHP to be a PHP code and to process it. So to describe the entire program, you can download this file in the course under the week 1 material. Here you can just see that I have something ready or like prepared already. So I will be going this like one by one. You see we have some variables and some conditions here. But to describe these, I will be using comments. I will be using comments in response to your code as well. And I will also be using comments, and I want to encourage you to use comments to comment on your own code. In case you come back to it, essentially, you will want to know how did you code this and, well, how does it work? Like, that is the biggest question after a while you might ask. So in PHP, we can specify 3 different types of comments. So first, we have the double forward slashes. This simplifies a single line comment. The other version of this is using the hashtag. You can use the hashtag as a symbol to specify a single line comment. All right. If you want to specify a multi-line comment, you have to do forward slash and a star. You have to end this by using star and forward slash. And this multi-line comment is going to be useful since you can open them and close them if you don't want to see them, and other very important stuff which I will be explaining in actually these parts. So this is the PHP file. If you want to put a PHP code and you want to execute it, you need to specify and you need to open not the file, you just need to open the PHP area for the code by typing less than and question mark. You can also type PHP, which is slightly more standard now, as just saying that this is a PHP code, and you have to end it. It is courtesy to escape the last line, so you have always the last line empty before the last one, but this is up to preference. So I've been talking about the lines, how to comment, and now the very important thing, code style. It is up to you how you want to write the code. there are a few things you have to follow, but PHP is, well, very robust in this, and you can type as many spaces as you want between conditions, variables. He will eat it. The problem is it increases the file size and decreases the, well, your performance to read the code. So I suggest you to actually type and find a way you find yourself like instantly knowing what the code does, because it's obviously you can see it right away and it's very easy. So now the big part of today's week are the variables and conditions. So variables, how do we create one? So variable is an unknown. As in mathematics, it's just an unknown as a part of the equation. Here in PHP, they're just names of, well, some kind of names, and we've assigned some value to those names. So if you want to create a variable, you have to start with a $sign. If you use the original VS Code settings, you should have all the variables being this blue. And if you want to initialize it, like give it a value, you just type equal and what you want to be equal to. All the lines and all the commands in PHP have to end with a semicolon. If you do not put a semicolon there, PHP will just think that this thing, what you wrote, is still unfinished, and it will look further into the code, look for the first semicolon, and after the first semicolon is found, it will execute the entire command up to that semicolon. And if it's an error, because that command might not exist or something similar, or there's just error in syntax, well, you find yourself to be having a nightmare. So just just be cautious, take your time, write your semicolons correctly. As I've been talking about a code style, this is my code style. So I start simply just naming a variable. I use underscores if I want to specify like different parts of like the same name. I can just use $sign as a one word, but I like to use underscore just to specify that it's like a, it is a subname in that one is dollar and the other is sign. It leads the same thing. You can also use dash, but as you can see, the dash is not sometimes fully done. So I would just suggest you to use underscores all the time. And generally, dashes are meant that it's just minus and not a part of the entire naming of the variable. So just again, what this piece of code does, we initialized a variable, $sign. We do not need to initialize what the type of the variable is. I'm gonna talk about that in this section mainly, type juggling. But for like now, what you need to know is that we initiated a variable and we assigned it a value of 10. This is the decimal value. So it's not bit value or something else, it's just decimal 10. So now, how do we use it? Like, what can we do with this? Well, we can just, we can create different variables. We can create variable 2 and assign it the value of 2. Again, if you've set up everything correctly, the file should be read. If you go under the thing, the PHP will warn you that there should be a semicolon, and you still haven't put it there. So you just typed it, and it helps you a lot. You can just Control S again, save. You can go File and save manually there. So now we have two variables, a $sign, which has a value of 10, and a variable called 2. So this is not the only type of variable we can set. So far we only use decimal numbers, but we can use very big amount of types. So some of the basic types, we have booleans, which are single bit piece of code, or I mean just piece of information, not code, I'm sorry, which just holds if it's true or false. So if it's true, it usually has the bit value of 1. If it's false, it usually has the bit value of 0. We already used the decimal, so here we assign the name variable 0, and we also can just put, well, as you can see, characters. We can't put characters as a standalone because PHP, everything which is not in these two, considers as a part of PHP. Meaning, if I would do the same thing up here, it wouldn't see that there's a problem, right? It just doesn't say anything. If I save, it also still works, but this code would not run. This would trigger an error, as you can see. Exemption has occurred. Use of undefined constant a, assume a, and this will throw an error of future versions of PHP, blah, blah, blah. But as you can see, it thought that a is nothing. It's something which is or should be in PHP, but isn't. Yeah, you can press stop there to stop the debug. So if you want to specify a character, you have to type it in quotation marks. You can also use the double quotation marks. It doesn't matter which one you choose to use. So for ordinary programmers, this would be a big no-no. Characters are usually written as a single quotation mark and just putting the character in between. But here you can also specify with double quotation mark, which should sign that this is a string. I haven't said what string is, but first, just to introduce the string, I have to introduce you to arrays. So what are arrays? Arrays are fields of value, simply put. We can create arrays in multiple ways. Here I'm using the array function, and we're gonna talk about functions in the next week. But for now, I can just create it like this. I can use the other function called var dump, which I will remove the quotation mark so you can see now. Control S, F5. Oh god, alright, sorry. Yeah, the debug doesn't want to run now. Great. Okay, let me just, there we go. Sorry about that. So this is the location of the file. This is the number of the line which triggered it, which is 23. And this is the dump, of like the PHP memory of what about the variable. So I named the variable array. So what is it? This tells us that this is a type array. This is how many members are inside of the array. So in array, you always get assigned a key to a value. It works like a dictionary if you would want to find something. So we have 0, and to 0, or index 0 in our case, there is assigned a string with the length of 5 characters called hello. On the index 1, we have an integer, which is 0. This is the decimal integer, not a bit one. So on the index 2, we have a boolean, which is set to false. And on 3 we have boolean, which is set to true. So this is what var dump does. Can show you in the debug specifically everything you might need to know. So what does this line of code do? Here we add things to an array. So we can initialize the array like this, or we can initialize the array by doing exactly the same thing I did here. So I can do array, and I can just not put anything in between. And that means it will just add it to the latest key that is available. And it's taking indexes, and indexes starts at 0. So the first item is on the 0th position. It's always -1. The second one is on the first position, and so on and so on. So we want to create the same thing. So here we initialize. This is the first time that this code knows about the variable called array. And we're specifying this using this thing, that this is an array. So to the code, or to the PHP, it would seem like this is a variable called array. Create an array and put the first thing there to be hello. So now if you want to add things to the array, we use the same thing. But now instead of it like creating a new variable based on what we type on the right side, it adds instead. So this variable, since it's the first time the PHP code knew about it, it will create it. But here it's already known, and we just want to find the latest position, and we want to store in that position the decimal 0. So we can do the same thing here, and we can now control F5, I mean not control F5, but just F5. And this triggers this var dump again, so we can check on position 27. So that is this one, so that one is correct. So everything we put here, since this is commented, this piece of code will not execute since it's in a comment. It's considered as just a plain text without the function, just to inform whoever views the file itself. So it dumps the same thing, but here we reduce these 4 lines of the code to 1, which is much more beneficial. You can also add multiple without using the function, but I would just recommend to use the function because you will not get lost inside of it. Alright, so we know what happens here. So we can just remove the var dump and execute. Again, this will start a new array, which is called as a variable called array. The first is going to be a decimal of 0, so that is correct. The second thing is going to be a character A, but as you can see, the system recognizes it as a string. I will talk about that in a second. And here we have just a boolean, which we should have, elsewhere, which is in basic types. If you select a piece of code, VS Code will find the same code throughout the entire, text editor. So if we select this, it highlights this thing. So we can obviously see here we initialize the variable because this is the first time we encountered the variable named boolean. And we initialize it as to be true. Here we set the same variable to be false. So it's still stored in that variable. If I mouse over here, you can see the linting, the suggestion on the PHP which the extensions provide. So if I mouse over the first one, nothing happens. If I mouse over the second one, we can already see that Boolean is set to true. If I mouse over this one, we see that Boolean is now set to false. So these are predetermined values the PHP knows of. In the career, you will definitely not have this. You will have unknown variables and you have to work with them like an unknowns. So this is what creates. So we again have a variable which is an array. It has 3 members. 0th position, aka the first member, is a decimal of 0. The second member is a string A. And the last one is a Boolean, which is set to false, because this one set it to false, and we're just using the variable inside of the array. So this means you can set a variable to be another variable. So now, how it works. So before I jump on strings, we also have to talk about very, very important thing about PHP coding. But it's not essentially a PHP code in general only, but it works across all the languages. So this is now for those completely beginners. If I set something to be equal to something, let's just define the variable, let's name it A, and let's say that the A is equal to 10. All right, that's pretty reasonable. But what happens if I do A equals A plus 10? In mathematics, you would instantly say, oh, this is 0 equals 10, and this will return an error. Well, will it though? We can use the echo function to just display it in the debug console. So I will start debugging. But it says 20. So how does this work? We have something which is happening on the right side. So the result of what is happening on the right side will be saved to the left side. This is how the coding works. So here the result 10 is 10. So 10 is stored into the variable A. Here is we take the variable A, we can again mouse over it to see it's equal to 10. So we should know that it is equal to 10. And we say we want the variable plus 10, and we want to save the result into the variable named A. Again, if I mouse over here, we can see what it is equal to. So that is equal to A plus 10. This is where the linter fails. You cannot no longer see the true value of A there. But you have to imagine, since we set up A previously, then this is going to be 10 plus 10, and this will echo 20, because 10 plus 10 is 20. All right, so strings. Strings is a field of characters. And this is being said as you should define string as a field of characters. This is what most of programming languages, C, Java, will tell you. So in order to create strings and so on, you would have to specify the length of the string. Not in PHP. So now we're getting to the differences between the normal programming languages and PHP now. So normal programming languages like C and Java, you have to specify some stuff. The latest versions, you can just create strings with not set like the maximum length of the strings. That works for arrays as well in some cases. Here, you just have unlimited in quotation marks. You are limited by the resources of PHP, which they do have a limit, but the limit is extremely huge and you might not ever surpass it. So, if I create a variable called string, and I save the string, the text, let's talk about it as a text, hello, inside of the string. I can echo it back. Echo is one of the functions, but again, we're going to have functions in the following week. And it just dumps echo. We can also use var dump again. So that's var underscore dump. Just make sure you put them between brackets like this. Can run F5 and it dumps that it's a string with 5 characters and the string itself is stored between those quotation marks and that is hello. So that is correct. Since strings are essentially arrays of characters, it means that a single character is a member of the array. So how do we access an array first? So here we created some arrays. So let me just unblock this piece of code. Again, I can echo this part so we know what it contains. So we have 0th position and we have the integer of 0. So I can just type echo the name of the variable, which I named it an array, and I can put the specified character or specified thing I want from the array. So let's say we want the first index, which is the second character. It's gonna get complicated. So we put there just a number 1. I will quotate the var num now, just so we see it. And it results A. So here we had the decimal 0 on the first position, index is 0. This is the second position, index is 1. So when we ask for the first index, which is essentially the second member of the array or of the field, how we want to call it, then that's just, that is the A. That's precisely what we wanted. So strings, again, are arrays, which means I can type string and I can access the index of the string. So if I want the E, for example, E is on the second position, which means in index, that's 2 minus 1, so that's first position. And I use the echo function again. Oh, sorry, I accidentally typed an S there. And the function echo, which will drop things to debug console, is E. So we access the string. Again, we can mouse over the string, we see it's hello. And yeah, this is the array. So strings are arrays of this. And just a little side note before I go to type juggling, which is going to be the most interesting thing today, probably, to people who actually know some code and just code in different languages. We can create matrices. So here we have A, so let's name it A, B, C, D. So now we know it's a string. It's on the first index position. So we can simply access array. We know that this is the second member, so that's first index. And we want to extract D, for example. So that's the fourth thing So index is 4 minus 1, so that's 3. And we simply echo this thing. And we got the D. So this is that. Of course, we can create arrays out of arrays. So that's how usually matrices are made. They're just array. It's just an array of arrays. So we can call it array 2. And we just do this, and we say that this is equal to our previous variable, array. We can also add, sorry, that was 3 arrays. We can also add some other members and stuff like that. We can war dump. Just pay attention that I'm not using echo while displaying arrays, because if I would use echo, it will just return that that's a type of an array and the echo doesn't know how to execute it. Yeah, you can see it just doesn't know. It's array to string conversion. It just doesn't know. So we're just gonna get rid of it. And we're gonna continue the code. We can find everything we wanted to have, array to string conversion, the stack trace where it was located, but this is the main thing. So this is the PHP notice. So it's not an error, but it's a warning that this shouldn't be the thing you're probably looking for. So that's what PHP notice does. There are PHP warnings, which are simply warnings that beware you using or accessing like a sub-matrix of a variable which is not initialized. So the code will eat it up, like it will just throw this warning, but it will not like fully crash, and that's the beauty of this as well. So the array here is what we got by using that echo, but now we got war dump. So let me just rerun the code without the errors. And we have an array. So the variable was named array2. And it was array. And it had 2 members. So the first member, which is index 0, has a value of an array, which has 3 members. And that is the previous array we had here. Also, we added just the member with Boolean false, and that was added to this one. We can also, since this is now the part of the array, we can access it on the 0th position, and we can dump new variables there, so we can just dump true there as well. And now it shows the true as well. Alright, that was complicated. But I think this is going to be very interesting. So if you know anything about coding, I think you were already impressed what can I store in an array. Because in normal coding, you have to define an array as a single type of variable. So array of numbers, array of characters, array of strings. And this is the beauty of PHP, because PHP has a thing called type juggling, which is essentially this. Oh yeah, let me get rid of the war dump so we don't have it there. There you go. So I define a variable called number, and I assign the value of 10, but I put it as a string, as a text. Here I created a variable called multiply, and I want to store the result of the variable number times 2 into this variable. So everyone who would know anything about coding again would say, but this is not impossible. This is a text, this is a string, and I'm multiplying it by 2. It wouldn't mean a thing. Yeah, and this, again, I will remember, I will just say it, is the beauty of PHP. As you can see, the debug console returned 20. What had happened there? we can use war dump to further see what had happened between these things. We can also dump the multiply variable, and I will just to cancel the echo variable for now. All right. So we have a string which has 2 characters. The character is 1 and 0. So that is correct. Here we use the some kind of a variable is this variable, the string, times 2. So I put it here to see it hasn't changed. It's still a string. But the multiply variable is an integer and has a decimal value of 20. This is type juggling. PHP itself will modify the variables in order for them to be compatible. You can do it yourself. You can specify that you want to convert it to the integer to a float and further on. But you can also just let it do its thing. If you do not specifically need a special thing, you can just ask a big questions in conditions, which I'm going to talk about right now, actually. So we essentially got to this. And we now know that there's a thing called type juggling, which changes the variable temporarily, as you've seen. So it's compatible with a different variable, and we could store the result in a different variable again. So yeah, that's a lot. So now it's time to talk about conditions. So conditions are when we ask and say the program to, have a specific conditions. So if a variable, for example, is greater than 10, which is this example, let me just uncomment that. Here I named it test, and I set the value to be 10. If it's greater than 10, then just output 10 as a string. If it's greater than 5, just output 5. And if none of both of these are true, then, and this is the default state, you just echo the text not bigger than 5. So if I would run the code, I got the thing 5. Why didn't I get 10? Because this condition, and this is how we create conditions. We type if, then we use brackets. Since if you wouldn't, this would be the error you would get in PHP. You would also see syntax error unexpected variable and expecting opening bracket. Again, this is the code style thing. You can put it right here. You can make a space there. You can also use it like this. This is up to. This is just how you like the code. I like it this way because, well, I see it as it is. And we specified here that it needs to be greater than 10. There are differences between greater or equal, and less, of course. So if I would type is bigger than, and I put equals, this would mean if a variable test is greater than or equal to this thing, which is 10, then type 10. So now if I would run the code, I would get 10 instead of 5. So now in type juggling, let's say we have a variable which is a string. We got it using like a foreign API, for example. And we want just to compare it if it's greater than some value. Well, we would have to convert the value we got from the API to an integer, then say if it was greater than, and then do some other things. Well, here we don't have to. So we got a string. If I run the code, it still outputs 10 because when this converts to an integer, the decimal value of this is 10. Of course, there might be some other issues. So let me comment this code now and use var dump. So if I would put a space and use the var dump, again, you see I got the string. If I would use test times 2, what would it output? Again, 20. The conversion was successful. If I would type A and then 10, and then run it, we got an error. A non-numeric value encountered. So, sorry. And this is PHP warning. So we had a notice. Now we have warning. So warning doesn't crash the code. So the code will continue after the warning like it wouldn't have happened. But since there was a non-numeric value, the PHP code thinks, oh, okay, let's just throw down the warning and just say that this is 0. So it returns 0. So this is why it returns the integer 0. Even when it's time 2, well, 0 times 2 is still 0. All right. So now, how to put it into the conditions? So we can either do this. We can, of course, just also do this. So in this case, the variable test is a decimal, but this is a string. But again, the string will be converted to an integer and it will execute this piece of code. So in code, if you type if, you should get some indication of what you can do. So the first is just a completion. So if I click on it, nothing happens. But if I use the second one, which has this openness and this at the bottom, it creates a template for the if conditions. So we have if, then we have condition, so we can just type test is greater than 2. In these brackets, we will write our code that we want to execute only if the condition is met. So if the variable test is greater than 2. It doesn't have to be a variable. We can just say if, well, 1 is bigger than 0. As we know that this should always be correct, so there's no need to have this condition there in the first place. Again, we can choose from different templates. So we have if with a question mark, if else. So if with question mark, this is the ternary. We will discuss this in probably week 4, so we don't have to deal with this. But this is a very nice thing. Instead of typing ifs, you can type it in one line. And it's somewhat faster as well. So again, if we have if else, which will just output if condition and else something. So we write the code between those brackets, what do we want to execute. If it's a single line of code, we have to use tab here just to use this. And we just put a single line there. And that's when the condition ends. So in this case, I can type as many stuff as I want here, and they would all execute. If I would type it here, it wouldn't execute anymore, and it would be a problem. So I can say a equals 2. As you can see, there is a problem. The PHP will notify you. Syntax error unexpected else, expecting end of file. So, if we don't want to use the brackets, we need to have a single line. Single line meaning a single command, not a line, I'm sorry. So this wouldn't work. You just have to have one single command there. So in our case, it's echo, which throws it up to the debug console. So, just a small Let's redo the conditions again. So we create them by using if. Then we open brackets and close them. Inside those brackets, we write our condition. So variable bigger than something. Something same as. If you want something to be equal, then we just use double equal. Because if we would only use the normal equal, it would assign the string 10 to test. We're going to use this again in week 4, because this will be very beneficial to a lot of our functions as soon as we learn them. If we want to have a stronger condition without the type juggling, for example, if you want to be the same value and the same type without converting using different types, like from string to integer or from integer to string, we use triple equals. So in this case, this is the decimal 10 and this is the string 10. This condition would fail and we would get 5. If I would change these to strings, it would be equal again. So that is 10. Alright. And last thing today, you will be mostly using if statements, but there are also switches. Switches are used when you have a given like predetermined value of a variable. It is better to use ifs if you want to have like something like greater than, equal than something, like the type as well. If you can also use switches if you know the predetermined values of a variable. So we start switches as switch. We open our brackets. We got the variable inside. And again, we have these lines of code. And then we have cases. So this essentially said, if the case of this variable is equal to 1, it can also be 1 like this, but it's type juggling, so it doesn't matter. It would echo 1. So if I run this, it echoes 1. Again, I can just remove this and it would have the same effect because the type juggling. So in switches, you need to break after each cases in order to get out of the switch. If I wouldn't use break here, it would continue whatever's below that case to execute as well, meaning that now it would type 1 and also not 1 in a single line. And then is a break here, and that would escape the switch and, well, escape. If I wouldn't do this, you see it would make a difference. But if we want to have specific values, let's say we want for cases 1, 2, and 3 to output 1. So this is what we would use it for. Then it would break. And for case 4, we would use echo hello, for example. And that's triple L. So in our case, now it would just echo 1. If we would use 3 and run the code, it would say 1. If I would use 4, it should say hello. So that concludes this video. So in this video, I'll quickly and briefly talk about it. We created variables using $sign. We assign a result of an action which is happening on the right side of the equal sign. And on the right side, we always have some kind of result of something, and that result is going to be saved into the variable. So this is how we can type what it was. Yeah, it was in type juggling. I'm sorry, I think. No, it wasn't. All right, I removed it. All right. So this is how we can assign a variable. Let's call it an a, and say that it's equal to a plus 2. So in our case, since a is undefined, we would get a warning or notice. We have undefined variable a. So we can define it by just saying that is 2. Because in this case, if you're accessing the variable a, but it's not there, we say that a is equal to something here, but it's not there like in the previous part of the code. So that's why it's non-existent. So now it is existent, and now this is equal to 4. So we have different types of variables: booleans, true, false; numbers, I only used plus numbers, but also we can type minus, of course. So -1, -1000, whatever we want. We have characters which are essentially stored as a string. They're always stored as a string, to simplify it. I've said something about arrays, which will be useful. How to do matrices within those arrays. How to create arrays from arrays. I've said a lot of things about type juggling and how it can convert between different types of the variables. This is a completely unique thing to PHP. I've said a thing about conditions. I've explained the difference between single equal, just that it equals to this saves what's on the right side to the left side. And if the save is correct, if it loads into the variable, then the if condition results that if the assign is successful, then the if condition says it was successful and it was resulted as a true because of type juggling again. If we use double equal, that means equal with type juggling, so I can do 10 here as a decimal and 10 here as a string. And if I would use triple equal, that would mean the same type without type juggling, without the conversion using type juggling, and 10, and I would execute this code. I've also talked about switches, how do they work, but in this entire course, I will try to avoid switches as much as possible, because the predetermined value is something you might really not have a very long, very often. So the switch is not that good for this. All right. So today it was a very long lesson, but I've explained the basics of PHP. I've explained the basics of how variables interact with each other, how the result on the right side is being stored into the variable, and how conditions work. So this was a big lesson. There is going to be a small task. I will be making a separate video for the task, so please check the student materials for this. And the task is going to be something very simple and comparing using conditions and using echoes. It shouldn't take longer than 10 minutes to code that, even when you've just seen this. If you've seen this entire video, then you shouldn't have issues. I will also link to the php.net website, and there are specific things about type juggling. Yeah, it doesn't exist for some reason, but it is there somehow. uh, yeah, variables. Yeah, we have some basics predefined. Yeah, you can look like on different stuff, and there are like further examples on the php.net website itself. Why I couldn't find type juggling is out of my idea, but yeah, whatever. Yeah, it should pretty much say the same thing. I will leave some links below this as well, like in the YouTube video if you're watching through YouTube, so it's easier to navigate through. So thank you for watching this first tutorial. It was a very long one, but the future ones will be very short ones, because this was the absolute basic you need to know to actually start doing this thing now. So you can start doing a small piece of code that should initially just push you into the right direction of knowing what to do in PHP. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next week, but also in the task video.